Okay, so now we are getting ready to build our xylophone. In the last video, we covered the concept of for loops, which allows us to run a bunch of code without having to individually write every single piece of thing that we want. So in this case, we wanted to make a bunch of squares. Instead of having to write rectangle over and over and over again, I just had to write it once, and then inside of the for loop, it just runs that using this I counter, and then I move each one by changing this value here, I is 0, then I is 1, and adding to that. Okay, you can see that in the last video. We also had talked about arrays, how to refer to the values in an array by its index. And so that, as we move on to making our xylophone, you can kind of see the pieces coming together. So we can make all these bars. We have all these arrays that have different values in them that are going to represent our key press or our note or the color that's going to change. So we have all the tools in place now to start building this xylophone. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make the bars of my xylophone. All right, so I'm just going to go into this little for loop example that I did. I'm just going to copy and paste that code and put it right here into my draw function. Okay, now I want to have, if I run it here, okay, we see there I have my xylophones. I'm also going to note I changed the canvas to be 500 across just to fit everything in there, because I want to have 8 bars on my xylophone. So I run that. Now I have 8 bars, but I also want there to be a little bit of a space. So these, if I look at my code here, I'm starting at 50, and then when I sort of do I times 50, that means every single rectangle is going to move 50 to the side here as I multiply 50 times the counter, which would start at 0, then it'd be 50 times 1, then 50 times 2. So that's how I'm moving them all to the side. But I'm going to go here to the third argument and just change that to 40, so that even though every rectangle will start 50 away, it will only be 40 pixels across. So it'll leave just a little bit of space in between each one there. All right, so now we see that. And then I also want these bars to be a lot longer. So remember, the last value of our rectangle function is the one that affects the length from top to bottom. So I'm going to change that to 200. And see, now I have 8 bars. All right, so instead of me writing rectangle 8 times and having to change the value every time, I was able to do 8 inside of this for loop very easily by just changing the number I wanted. And then when I wanted them all to be longer, I only had to change the value once. I didn't have to go through. So this is making my life a lot easier. Okay, so next what I want to do is I want to be able to change the color of each bar in my xylophone by pressing a specific key. Okay, so to do that, I am going to make some more arrays. Okay, so I am going to make an array called C, which is going to have the colors of my xylophone. Now you could fill this with a few different things. If you want to keep it as RGB value, you could do like hex values, which we've talked about. I'm actually going to keep it a little simpler than that. I'm gonna first of all switch my color mode here to HSB. Okay, so hue, saturation, brightness, and then I'm just gonna be changing the hue of each one. So I'm gonna do 0, I'm gonna go 30, then I'm gonna go 60, I'm gonna go 90, I think 120, and I'm gonna jump up, I think, to like 240, 270, 300. I might change these later, but this is sort of the values I'm going to work with for now. Okay, so now I'm gonna go inside here, I'm gonna do fill. All right, so first off, let's just say if I did fill at 0 and then 100, 100. So remember, HSB, this value is 0 to 360. This is 100. This is 100. Okay, so now they're all red. Notice the background turned white because the 220 is no longer grayscale for RGB, so I got to change that a little bit. I'm just going to reduce those slightly, and now it's a little more gray. That's fine. That'll work. All right, so they're all red. Now, here's what I want to do. Remember to refer to a value inside of an array. We write the name of the array, and then inside of curly brackets, we would write 0. So look, nothing's changed. Now here you see it's 0, and you might be thinking, oh, it's just 0 again, but this is referring to the index. So at index 0 of my C array is the value 0. If I were to change that to 1, turns orange, okay, which would be 30. So now the fill is at 30, and just to very quickly show you, if I were to just make that 30, it's the exact same one. So we see the power of the values of the array working here. If I were to change it to 2, it would give me this yellow, because 60 is at 2 index in this array, all right? So that is fine. But now we're going to combine the power of the array with the for loop, okay? So if I were to put I inside of this index, okay? So remember the counter of our for loop. It starts at 0. So the first time through, the first bar is going to be the index 0 of this array, okay, which is 0. So it's going to be red, and it's going to be made at this point here. Then, is I less than 8? Yes, it is. It's 0, so it's going to come back up. I now equals 1, so it will be C1, which is 30, and it will make it at 50 plus 1 times 50, which is 100, which would be this. So this will be the next space and the next value in this array. And then it'll continue. So at 2, it'll be index 2, and it'll be this one, and then index 3, and 3 times 50 would bring it here. So I'm not going to go through all. I'm just going to press it now so you can see. Suddenly now I have a fill of rainbow colors that go along with this. I'm going to maybe change this value here so it's a little different. That works, okay? And see, it's very easy. I just find that index. I looked at that, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and just change that value. Okay, so very exciting here. I just had to do a teeny bit of code, and I was able to change the colors of every single fill that I had here without having to write each individually, okay? So that is great. But next what I want to happen is, remember, I want key presses to be triggering all of this, all right? So I'm going to make, inside of my for loop now, I'm going to make a conditional statement. So if open close, parentheses, open close, curly brackets, and that if is going to be my fill, okay? So I want that fill to change, okay? So if I'm going to say, first let's start with key, capital I, capital P. So if key is pressed, change to the fill, okay? So they're white, press the key. Ooh, but then they all go back and they all went to purple. Why? Because I'm not pressing a key and it's just going to default to whatever is left, okay? So what I am going to do before that, very quickly here, is just make a fill as a default. I'm just going to put it at 0, 0, and then 100, which will make them all white. So 0 hue, 0 saturation, okay, but full brightness, which would make white in the HSB value. Okay, so now if I press a key, again, I click the canvas, they all change color, I let go, they all go back. All right, so I'm getting there, but now what I want to do is add, so individual key presses, okay? So in the past, we've done if key is equal to this, and then if we want another key, we do if key is equal to that, but we're just going to now make an array, and I'm gonna call it keys, okay? So inside this array equals, I'm going to put the names of keys. So arrays don't just have to hold numbers, they can hold other things as well. So in this case, I'm just gonna go through the middle row of my keyboard here and do the first 8 keys starting with A. So I have A, remember it has to be in parentheses or in quotes, then S is after that, then D is after that, then F, then G, then H, then J, then K. Right, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So these are all the different keys I want to use for my keyboard, okay? So if key is pressed, I'm going to make this a compound conditional statement. And, okay, if key is pressed and key is equal to, and then I'm going to do keys, and that counter again, I, all right? So you think about it. It's constantly checking, is the key pressed and what key is being pressed, okay? So if key is pressed and the key is counter I, it would be 0, then it would transport that to the fill would be I, and it would do at the rectangle of I, okay? So let's see what happens here. So I click the canvas, I'm gonna press the A key, changes, I let go. S, D, F, G, H, J, K. Okay, so success. Success, all right? So by using this counter again, I have an array of keys that just have the names of all the different keys I want, and then when it checks, is the key equal to whatever I just pressed? And again, this is in draw, so it's constantly checking to see what is what here, all right? Which is why I can make all this work, okay? So now, the last thing I'm going to do is take this ask.freq out of just draw here. I'm going to include it inside of this if key is pressed so that the counter will apply to the fill, but now also the frequency. And keep in mind, I have all these notes I already made here in this array. So I have notes. So now instead of 0, I'm going to do notes I. Okay, so if I press the key that's at 0 in the index, which is A, it's going to give me the fill at 0, or index in C, and the note at 0 index of that. If I press 1, the key in index 1 is S, or I'm sorry, if I press S, that's in index 1, so that will add this fill and this note. If I press D, that's in index 2, so it'll add this fill and this note. All right, so now here we go. I press it, I go, I press A, I press S, D, F, G, H, J. All right, so there we go. So that is it. So through the power of arrays, knowing how to access the index, and the power of for loops, we have made an 8-bar xylophone with less than 40 lines of code, and there's quite a few spaces in here, so this is such a little amount of code for what, if we just wrote it as regular, would have taken way more time, a lot of copy and pasting and aggravation. So there's more you could do. You could try and figure out how to make each bar slightly smaller. You could add more bars, which would just mean you just add some stuff to your arrays and add some stuff to your counter here. So much you could do by playing around with this, and not just in this example, but with for loops and arrays as well. So I encourage you to try whatever you want to try with that, see what you can come up with, maybe change these to circles or who knows, okay? But that is the xylophone in p5. All right, so enjoy.